A single microphone and two unsteady voices marked the moment Princess and King Charles delivered a joint statement that sent a chill through the palace press room. "It's time to tell the truth," Charles said, and the silence that followed was absolute. No announcement had been scheduled, no briefing leaked, no warning given. Yet there they stood beneath the royal crest, summoned before a room full of reporters who could sense history closing in. Princess Anne appeared rigid, her expression forged from decades of restraint, while King Charles looked visibly older, his hands clasped as if holding himself together required effort. The pause before they spoke felt heavier than any scandal before it. Cameras clicked, pens hovered, and breath was held as Charles leaned forward, his voice low and unsteady, shattering protocol with a statement that was neither ceremonial nor comforting, but the opening of a long-buried confession. Speculation ignited instantly. Was this about Diana's enduring shadow, Prince Andrew's disgrace, or Meghan's departure that exposed cracks no one could seal? Newsrooms erupted, phones buzzed, editors scrambled, and behind the speaker's palace aides exchanged panicked glances, realizing this moment had not been rehearsed and no damage control plan existed. When Anne finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried something deeper beneath the surface, resolve shaped by years of silence, and the unmistakable signal that the monarchy's most private wounds were about to be laid bare. No matter who survived the truth that followed, frustration finally demanded release. Princess Anne did not smile or soften her words. She stated plainly that there were things the public deserved to know, not rumors or interpretations, but the truth. Beside her, Charles shifted, his eyes briefly closing as if bracing for impact. In that fleeting moment, he did not appear as a monarch but as a man standing at the edge of his own history, fully aware that one step forward would alter everything behind him. The contrast between them was striking. And remained composed and unyielding, a guardian of duty who had clearly made peace with the consequences. Charles, by contrast, appeared emotional and conflicted, carrying the visible weight of regret. Together, they formed an uneasy alliance, siblings bound not by loyalty, but by necessity. Outside the palace gates, crowds were already gathering, and headlines were being drafted before the truth had even surfaced. Every scandal of the past half-century resurfaced in the public consciousness, as though the monarchy itself were being summoned to stand trial for its own legacy. And still, the details remained unspoken, because before the truth could be revealed, the world had to understand the lies and how long they had been protected by those in power. Every monarchy thrives on image, but what happens when that image becomes a cage? Anne and Charles were not always truth-tellers. For years, they had been enforcers of silence. What had they agreed to hide, and why was the weight of that secrecy now threatening to collapse the very crown it was meant to protect? The answer stretched back decades, to the aftermath of scandals that left deep scars within the royal household. Faced with mounting public pressure and media chaos, the Queen summoned her children behind closed doors. What followed was not a discussion, but an ultimatum. A pact was forged, spoken not in legal language, but in bloodlines and obligation. Charles and Andrew and Edward were present, but it was Charles and Anne who grasped the deeper implication. The institution would always come before the individual, no matter the cost. On the surface, the pact seemed simple: no public acknowledgement of internal crises, no feeding the press with personal truths. All grievances, mistakes, and betrayals would be locked away and sealed if necessary. Yet beneath that simplicity lay a crushing burden. Silence alone was not enough. It required becoming active guardians of a version of reality that no longer resembled the truth. Over the years, documents were quietly buried: private interview transcripts, unanswered letters, unreleased testimonies. Some files, sealed since the 1980s, were known only to a handful of senior palace figures. They were not stored in official archives, but hidden in plain sight, shielded by layers of red tape and carefully veiled titles designed to ensure no outsider could ever connect the dots. Charles, raised from birth to carry the crown, understood the logic he had been taught. The monarchy, he was told, must be protected at all costs. And so, reluctantly, he played his part. And, however, never accepted that silence so easily. From the beginning, she questioned the morality of such protection. She understood it was not simply about preserving dignity, but about burying real pain beneath gold-embossed ceremony. Her objections were quiet and internal, but they never disappeared, always simmering beneath her composed exterior. Around them, palace advisors, often more powerful than the royals themselves, played a decisive role. These handlers, many of them former diplomats or intelligence affiliates, curated narratives, silenced dissent, and ensured that family wounds never reached the press without careful filtering. They were the architects of the palace's public image, but also the keepers of secrets so dangerous that even senior royals feared the consequences of their release. Over time, and began to realize the truth was not only about the past, but the present as well. The betrayal was not a long-forgotten scandal, it was alive, evolving, still moving through the institution. She started connecting whispers she had once ignored and patterns she had dismissed. Suddenly, the pact no longer resembled a safeguard. It looked like a trap, a prison built for them all, guarded by loyalty disguised as duty. Everything changed the night a forgotten file landed on her desk. It shattered the illusion of loyalty and reawakened buried guilt. Inside an unmarked envelope, sealed with trembling hands decades earlier, was a letter no one was ever meant to read. It was addressed to Princess and signed by Diana. What it contained was more than a cry for help. It was a coded warning about something unfolding deep within the palace itself, and had not intended to stay late that evening. Her visit to the palace archives had been routine, a historical speech transcript requested by a charity. Yet the silence of the room, the flickering overhead lights, and the dust-heavy air carried a weight that felt anything but ordinary. She moved through the files with half her attention elsewhere until her fingers brushed against a slim, yellowed envelope. It bore no royal seal, no filing label, no tracking code, only her name, written in Diana's unmistakable hand. And froze. Then the memories surfaced, the guarded conversations, the cold politeness, the unspoken tension that had always lingered between them. And in that moment, she understood that whatever truths had been buried were never meant to stay hidden forever. There had always been an unspoken understanding between them, a shared disdain for the pretenses that surrounded royal life. Diana had been many things, but above all, she had been desperate to be heard. Now, through this letter, her voice whispered from the past, and read it in fragments at first, unable to absorb its full weight. Diana wrote of betrayal not by strangers, but from within the very walls they all called home. She described the slow erosion of trust and the manipulations that twisted every attempt she made to escape the narrative being written for her. She no longer knew whom to trust. In the final paragraphs, Diana confessed she was unsure how long she had left to fight. What made Anne's breath catch was not only the fear woven through the words, but the clarity, the names, the implications. Diana hinted at unseen hands pulling strings, at decisions being made about her life far beyond her control. Then came the sentence that struck like a thunderclap: "If anything happens to me, promise you'll protect the truth." It was not a request, but a command, a plea disguised as prophecy, and it cut through and like glass. She set the letter down, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. How had this remained hidden? Why had no one ever mentioned it? And why had Diana trusted her with such a burden? Guilt came first, guilt that she had not searched for something like this sooner, that she had not truly heard what Diana had been trying to say while she was still alive. Then came fury, directed at the system that allowed it, at herself, and at everyone who had benefited from silence. This was not just a letter. It was evidence. It was motive. It was a turning point and had never anticipated. And amid the storm of emotion, one name appeared, quiet, understated, yet devastating. It was a name Charles had sworn never to speak again. Few people knew that Charles and Diana had met one final time just hours before she left for Paris. Fewer still knew what had been said behind those gilded palace doors. Now, for the first time, Anne would confront her brother about that night, and the truth would burn hotter than any tabloid scandal. She found him alone, seated in a room where countless royal decisions had been made and buried. There was no warning and no formality, only the letter in her hand and fire in her eyes. And demanded answers, not diversions, not polished statements approved by aides, but the truth. What had happened between him and Diana before her final journey? Charles did not respond at once. He avoided her gaze, and for a brief moment Anne thought he might deny it entirely. But then, slowly, as if something long sealed inside him was beginning to crack, Charles, a man preparing to relive a trauma he had long locked away, finally nodded. Yes, they had met. Yes, it had been private. Yes, no one else had known. He began to speak, and the room seemed to shift around the weight of his confession. That night, Diana had asked to see him alone, no staff, no media, no intermediaries. She was calm but distant, speaking with clarity but not peace. She admitted she had a bad feeling about leaving, that she felt watched, hunted. She did not name names, But her meaning was clear, hinting at interference, manipulation, and forces moving boldly behind the scenes the more she tried to live outside their control. And then she had done the unthinkable. She had asked Charles to protect her. His voice broke as he recounted it. She had looked at him not as a former husband or public adversary, but as someone she had once trusted, someone who might still influence the storm around her. But he had not taken her seriously. He told Anne, bluntly, that he thought Diana was spiraling, that her words were dramatic, that she was simply afraid of her own independence. He told her she was free. She told him she was not. He had not followed up. He had not called after she left. And the next day, she was gone. The car crash, the chaos, the public mourning, the conspiracy theories. Yet for Charles, it was never the event itself that haunted him. It was the conversation that came before. If I had listened, he whispered, maybe she'd still be alive. The confession hung heavy between them, but Anne did not blink. Comfort was not her aim. She had come for the truth. What Charles revealed next threatened to cast a shadow over the monarchy itself. The royal machine did not move on its own. Behind every cover-up was a benefactor, someone with power, wealth, and motives. As Anne dug deeper, she traced a trail of hidden transactions, secret meetings, and off-the-books royal funds, all pointing toward a chilling conclusion. Someone had paid to keep Diana silent. What had begun as a personal search for clarity quickly unraveled into something far more complex. And had intended only to review correspondence connected to Diana, but a stray reference in a restricted financial memo caught her attention. DF Allocation 1, 997. The line item discretionary funds was vague, loosely categorized, and signed off without oversight. Curious, Anne began digging through older ledgers, and what she found stunned her. Hundreds of thousands of pounds had been funneled through layers of intermediaries, routed through charitable fronts and diplomatic channels. Many of the recipients were not palace staff. They were code-named individuals, private investigators, surveillance experts, international security firms, some linked to intelligence agencies outside the UK. These were not royal protectors. They were silencers, and poured over every transaction, mapping a web that connected the palace not only to British agencies, but to foreign institutions. Money had exchanged hands. Favors had been granted. The flow of cash did not stop with Diana's death. It continued, redirected into damage control operations, lawsuits, reputation management. Every thread she pulled led deeper into a labyrinth that could not have been accidental. She turned to Charles, hoping he would finally acknowledge what the documents made clear in black and white. He admitted signing off on budget extensions during the 90s, but claimed he was never told how the funds were used. That responsibility, he insisted, had belonged to advisors, and was unconvinced. Her suspicions settled on those closest to Charles at the time, his inner circle, before Camilla became queen consort. Names began to surface: lobbyists, aristocrats, financiers, people who owed favors to the monarchy and were quietly paid, not honored with ceremony. It was not concrete proof, but it was enough to show this was bigger than personal betrayal. This was infrastructure, a system designed to preserve power by erasing truth, and stomach turned as she realized this had never been just about Diana. It was a culture of concealment so deeply embedded in the monarchy that no one questioned it anymore, as if the crown itself had developed an immune system, attacking anything that threatened its image regardless of human cost. The deeper she delved, the less it looked like a family tragedy and the more it resembled a cold, calculated operation, a kingdom of smoke and mirrors, bankrolled by people who would never face the cameras. Within that system, a name resurfaced from the past, long thought a footnote but now possibly the key to everything: Andrew. The royal liability, the scandal, had always been treated as a distraction, but what if he had been more than that? What if he had been a sacrificial pawn in a far larger deception? And uncovered the unthinkable: Andrew had not only been guilty, he had been used. It was a revelation she had not anticipated. And as she traced the threads further, as Anne reconstructed financial trails and pieced together the timeline of Diana's final months, a disturbing pattern emerged. Dates didn't add up. The blows to Prince Andrew's reputation had been timed with uncanny precision, landing just as questions about Diana's last days began to resurface in investigative circles. The press had been handed a target, and they never looked away. Internal briefings, sealed memorandums, and overlooked press strategies buried in royal communication logs revealed the truth. Andrew's scandal, while rooted in his own actions, had been accelerated, amplified, weaponized. Confronting Charles with the evidence, and pushed through his initial deflections, laying out manipulated leaks, coordinated statements, and financial trails. His face tightened, and eventually he admitted it: they had made a choice. To protect the monarchy from scrutiny, they had sacrificed Andrew, already controversial, already damaged, as the perfect lightning rod. And recoiled. She was not defending Andrew, whose actions were indefensible, but the idea of weaponizing justice, of turning scandal into strategy, was unconscionable. Optics had been prioritized over integrity, narrative over truth, and the cost had been human reputations destroyed, witnesses silenced, legacy rewritten, and investigation deepened. She traced the pattern beyond the family to palace staff. Aides dismissed without explanation, career paths abruptly terminated, relocations to remote posts, unexplained disappearances. Former maids, chauffeurs, private secretaries, many refused to speak, some hung up, and a few revealed the same story. Fear, enforced silence, lives quietly dismantled for knowing too much. Records included abrupt psychological evaluations, memos labeling staff as emotionally unstable or compromised, not diagnoses, but erasers designed to discredit those who threatened the institution. Some trails ended abruptly, others in tragedy. The palace did not merely rely on secrecy. It enforced it, often at the expense of those most loyal, and confronted Charles again, expecting denial or defensiveness. Instead, she saw shame. "We thought we were protecting the institution," he said quietly, "and knew better. It was control, not protection, and the cost had been paid in human lives." That night, she sifted through unsigned letters, journal pages, and unfinished resignation notes. The message was clear: the crown had created a machine that devoured its own the moment they stepped out of line. And then she remembered the Queen's final command after Diana's death, delivered with the weight of centuries pressing down: protect the crown, no matter what. From that moment, silence became survival, truth became dangerous, and emotion was a weakness. Charles retreated into guilt and silence, and struggled to reconcile duty with conscience. Over the years, the walls of secrecy only grew higher, and the lines between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. Now, with the Queen gone, the burden unbearable, and Charles made the unthinkable. They chose the truth. Their confession would not merely shock the monarchy, it would rewrite its legacy forever. When the joint statement was released through official palace channels, it spread like wildfire. Headlines thundered around the world, advisors scrambled, interviews were cancelled, and the carefully constructed facade of silence began to crumble. The monarchy would never be the same. Press briefings were quickly revised, but it was too late. The dam had burst, and nothing could erase the words now carved into history. For the first time, two senior royals admitted that the truth had been buried not out of ignorance, but by design. And Charles did not linger behind prepared statements. They appeared on live television, seated together, advisors nowhere in sight. The broadcast was unfiltered, emotional, raw. Charles spoke of guilt, of failure, of decades spent behind walls of tradition so thick even he had forgotten what was real. And spoke with fire for the silenced, for the erased, for the cost that had haunted the family for generations. The reaction was immediate and sharply divided. William remained silent, his expression one of quiet betrayal. Harry, from abroad, issued a statement of cautious support, though questions lingered in every carefully chosen word. Camilla, long the quiet power behind the throne, was reportedly furious, blindsided by a revelation that unraveled years of curated respectability. Inside the palace, panic replaced fury. Some advisors threatened resignation, others demanded retractions, clarification, damage control, but Anne and Charles refused. The time for edits had passed. This was the reckoning the monarchy had long avoided. Outside the gates, public response was loud and conflicted. Protesters marched not in anger, but in mourning for lives lost to silence, for truths denied, for a monarchy that could have chosen transparency but instead embraced shadows. And yet, others called the confession betrayal, an abandonment of the mystique that made the crown sacred. The divide was generational, moral, and deeply personal, a fracture now laid bare for the world to see.